Please tell me you weren't recording yet, Luke. Oh, good. He gave me the thumbs up. Hi, everybody. I'm Scott.
And I'm Luke.
And I'm Jonathan.
And this is the No Way to Hollywood podcast. Woohoo!
It is indeed the No Way to Hollywood podcast, which I'm sure you already knew because you clicked play on this, which is awesome. Thank you for doing so.
But if you didn't understand or know, this is No Way to Hollywood, as in like, no way! Or like, no way, we can't find our way to there. We can't get there. There's double meaning. I just wanted to spell that out for you in case you don't know.
It's ambiguous.
Except for the part where I just told you.
Well, guys, I got big news for you. Guess what I did earlier today?
What did you do?
What'd you do?
Did you get COVID?
No.
Oh, good.
I bought a movie ticket.
Whoa, you can do that?
Yeah.
Who let you buy a movie ticket?
Apparently, AMC is opening their theaters a little over a week from now. Well, no, actually a week from today. And now you can go and see movies in the movie theater again.
Uh-huh. And what did you buy a ticket for, Scott? What movie are you going to go see?
I'm going to go see the 10th anniversary edition of Inception in IMAX.
You're going to see Dune footage. They're going to do a trailer for Dune. Some teaser footage before Inception. And if you don't die, you should tell me how it is.
Well, we'll see how that goes. I'm still a little bit skeptical, but I am excited about that. And it does remind me of another time in my life.
Oh, I see what you're doing there.
Did you just have a flashback?
You know, I hadn't planned that, and then all of a sudden it was just too perfect, and I fell victim to one of the things I hate most in films.
And what's that, Scott? What's that?
Flashbacks.
Uh-huh. Flashbacks aren't evil, by the way. They're not that bad.
But the concept of flashback does get us to our topic for tonight. So we're going to take a maybe slightly more philosophical, technical look at the concept of time in film. Luke, can you just kind of start us off and talk a little bit about how different art forms have dealt with this concept of time?
Sure, I'll give it my best go here. I am not an art critic. I am not an art historian. Like I know very little. So I will share what little I know, and then you can correct me and add more in the comments below.
But you are a technolosopher. That's what you are.
Wow, I'm a technolosopher. I had no idea. I didn't even know that was a thing, but I'm really glad to be one, I guess. So
I just admitted it. It's great.
One of the things that's fascinating to me, because I like editing, so time and kind of shortening time or elongating time or switching time is something that I deal with all the time. And with art, it's cool to kind of see how time is dealt with in different media, right? Like if you've got a painting, right? Traditionally, you can like paint someone sitting there, or you can paint somebody being stabbed at this one moment. But if you want to tell their life story, one of the ways that artists did this is they would paint like the person being born, and then like there's a tree, and then there's like the person like growing up and falling in love, and then like, a waterfall, and then here's the person like, getting stabbed, right? So like you've got like this progression by having multiple images on one frame, right? So that's one way of handling it, is you've got these multiple events happening at the same time, and then you look at them on the painting, right? But then you eventually get to like, okay, well, what if we just did multiple images, right? So instead of all in one image, what if we like do a whole sequence of images? And then you come to, and I don't exactly remember exactly how this all fits out, but eventually you get to questions like, hey, is my horse completely leaving the ground while it's galloping. Like, do all 4 feet lift off the ground? And so they like have a bet, and then they hire a photographer who sets up like 25 cameras to capture images as the horse is galloping along. And, you know, the guy who bet that his feet are all the way off wins. And now you've got like this sequence, and you can play this sequence by like showing it to you. And then you've got like this technology where like you've got a circle, and you can look through a little slit, and like the images pass by, and like it looks like it's moving. And that's really amazing. And then eventually you're like, oh wow, what if we found a way to connect all these different photos, this new technology that would come up, but all these different photos, and like take a picture every like, you know, 24th of a second, and we just, and that's why you got that film rattle thing. And so you're doing that for like 100 years. But then you're like learning that like, wow, we could like shorten time. We don't just have to like show people walking somewhere and then doing something. Like, we can like cut from the person like arriving to them inside the house. Like, we can just do that. And it's interesting to me because like theater already had this idea of like cutting from one time to another by dropping the curtain, right? You drop the curtain, you pull it back up, it's a totally new setting, a new time, something else is going on. And that's really cool that we can like bring that into film. But then you like get into film where like, what if we showed the events out of order? Like, what would that do to people? And can they handle it? And so there's all these different questions of that. And so as an editor, I sit there all the time, and I was just doing this today, where I wanted this joke to play a little bit better. So I was like, oh, well, I could like just cut to something else for a minute and then come back to the person delivering their line and give them even more time for like that silly separation thing to happen. So like time, and then I'm also a sucker for low budget time travel movies. So like, just how does time work in general? Like, all this stuff is interesting to me. So there you go, Scott. I just nerded out for a little while.
Thanks, Luke. Jonathan, what have you seen as this concept of time in film, and how it's shaped over time? Like, what are some of the big moments that you see in film as it relates to how we portray time?
Wow, I feel like I'm gonna miss something big. I'm like, you've studied film. How dare you not remember that French film?
It's true. The French New Wave, like, that was big. Okay,
yeah, they do a lot of different things. I do think that Citizen Kane's an interesting one to bring up, because Citizen Kane is a biopic of a fictional character, so it's playing with time in the sense of you're going through the guy's whole life. That's the thing, right? Starts at the end of his life, jumps all the way back to when he's a kid, goes through his whole entire life, his young adult years, his adult years, his old adult years, and the different stages of his life, and then ends with his death, right? And so it's linear, but it's not. It's a little out of order, right? It kind of starts here, and there's a framing device of writing an article about this guy, and there's lots of flashbacks. Like, the whole movie is basically flashbacks. You don't just consider that. Or let's talk about, and this is one where it's not, I'm thinking flashbacks again, but Rashomon, which is Akira Kurosawa is playing around with perspective by using flashbacks in a court case, essentially, to say, here's what happened. Nope, just kidding. Here's what happened. Nope, just kidding. Here's what happened. And to some extent, it's a little ambiguous, if I recall, but, you know, I haven't watched the movie in a long time, so I don't remember exactly how it ends. Point is, there's 3 different storylines all looking back at it. There's Pulp Fiction, which was, everyone loved in the 90s because it did play around with what story was being told when. You know, it was an interconnected universe of characters, but what story happened when was highly subjective. You would see characters who had just died show up in another story later. Like, it was the same character, but it was different time frames that you were messing around with. Other parts in film that deal with time in an interesting way. I'm forgetting, I'm sure. Lots, and there's anything that has to do with time travel, of course, is always can be very trippy about how it sort of makes you sense and feel time. But I mean, I would also just,
I like Memento because, you know, you got this interesting dual timelines in the film.
I would also just say that almost any journey, road trip, epic sort of film has this sense of in 2 hours you feel like you went a lot longer than 2 hours. Not because a movie maybe doesn't feel long, but you feels dense. It feels like you went a lot of places, like you lived a life, you went through a journey, and you sat down on your butt for 2 hours, which you did, but you feel like you went everywhere and did all these crazy things, and like oh my goodness, we went and did all, like that's kind of a movie thing, right? That's a movie thing. TV shows can do that too, but they have to do that over the course of multiple episodes, which means hours upon hours of time. Whereas a movie says 2 hours, you're done, and yet you can feel like, oh my goodness, I went through this guy's whole life, or oh my goodness, we went and fought the Crusades and came back, or whatever it may be. So time and the ability to cover vast amounts of it has long been a movie film medium ability.
Yeah. I mean, time is a very interesting concept. And I think more recently, some of the films that I think have done a good job of that. I mean, we've talked about Inception in a previous episode, and we also talked about the Memento, which tells basically the same story on the same timeline, coming one from the future and one from the past and meeting in the middle. I also love Arrival and how it portrays time as a circular thing where you've already experienced the future a little bit. Not necessarily time travel, but an interesting play on what time travel is. Um, so yeah, there's some great films out there that definitely deal with this topic.
But here's the thing about time as a concept and film dealing with time, whether it's in the story or how it can technologically record, is time is about perception, and movies are about perception. What information do you know? When? What are you looking at? I went to documentary class, and one of the first things they tell you in documentary class is that every time you point the camera somewhere, you're telling something. You've made a choice. You can't, in a sense, you can't always tell the truth because you're not showing everything all the time. You're never going to. You're going to point the camera somewhere, and you're going to record, and then you're going to edit it together, and you're going to have some viewpoint when you edit it together, and whatever you come out with, you can try to tell the truth as best you can, but it's always going to have a subjectiveness to it, a perception, a viewpoint that you give to it, right? And so using this technology of editing and storytelling and filmmaking, right, using cameras, you're dealing with what your perception is. And Arrival is fantastic because it says if your perception was wide enough to sense your entire life at the same time, all at once, then what is your perception of time? What is your perception of life? And so the cool things that happen in time travel movies and time loop stories and or episodes of television are about your perception of what happens when in chronological order. If there's anything Christopher Nolan likes to do, is to play with your perception of what happens when and why. He likes to just play around with that and structure it in different ways. He just said, by the way, in some interview, offhand comment, he said that Tenet, he thinks, he was telling his editor for this one, he's like, Tenet may be the hardest movie any editor's ever had to edit because of how much it plays around with time and does things differently. So, in a sense, if it's so much about perception, and movies and storytelling is so much about when you reveal information and your perception of characters or perception of moments or perception of a building, even how is it framed. Everything about the medium is about what you see, hear, understand when. And so time is super good and super valuable and tool to keep track of in film because it is another important tool of perception.
Well, and this is reminding me of when we were talking about prequels. And if you decide to start your story here, then you're choosing not to tell this story because this is the one you want to focus on. And yeah, you have to reference these things, but you can do it through just inference and reference. And then when you go back and try and show that, unless it is to shift your perception, and even then, like the Star Wars prequels didn't do it well enough to get it, right? Like it doesn't work because you already chose to start here for a reason.
But you know who figures that out though? Is anime. Anime knows how to do prequels all the time. It blew my mind. I was just realizing, like, it's what you want. Anime is the one medium, storytelling medium, where I'm like, give me the prequel thing. Why? Because I don't know the things I need to know yet. I know enough to like these characters and to know this story and to go forward in it and know enough to like care. But you have to, like, there's always these seasons or these episodes where you finally go back and you finally see what all these characters have been referring to. And it definitely almost always shifts your perception of at least a character, if not the entire conflict of the entire story.
Yeah, and that's good writing, because that's hiding information, giving you a perspective, right? Basically lying to your audience for a while so that you can reveal this later so that they can go through the growth and learning process as well. Like, that's great. Love that.
Yeah, I mean that kind of brings me back to like a book series like the Chronicles of Narnia that were written out of sequential order, and how do you play with that? So I mean, I don't think this concept of time and telling stories, because honestly, in Chronicles of Narnia, you do get a great sense of reveal when you go back and you read the original, like the first story in the sequential series, and you're like, oh, that's how that came to be. So there is a lot of good reveals in that as well. But one of the things I would like us to kind of talk about are some of the tools that we use in film to distort, change, affect time. So, I mean, I already know we've joked a little bit, and we continuously joke off camera about how much I hate flashbacks.
I don't think it's a joke.
Hold on.
It's not a joke.
Wait a minute. Yeah, that was crazy when you did that. Remember that last time we joked about that? I just did.
Well, I appreciate the humor. I don't actually hate flashbacks. I hate flashbacks used in a storyline that's never used flashbacks before, like Star Wars. But that's just my opinion. What are some of the reasons why you would choose to do a flashback, and what's a movie that's actually done flashback really well?
Rashomon is all about flashback. That movie is like the entire concept of that story hinges upon the idea of being able to have someone tell a story, have a flashback where you see their version of events, and then have another person tell a story about that same moment from their perspective and see how it all plays out differently. It is an incredibly effective version. And the stuff that you don't like in the Star Wars movies, at least one of them where they do a flashback, is basically doing that same kind of thing in a much faster version of it. Does it need to be a flashback? We can debate that all we want to, but that is where, flashbacks, I think, are sometimes the most fun when you get to have multiple of the same event and see mostly how a character perceives things and or what they thought and or what they noticed about the event, and then you try to figure it out. There's a great X-Files episode that has a debriefing with Mulder and a debriefing with Scully about the same case they just went through, and the way that all the characters are portrayed and the events happen is incredibly humorous because of the different perspectives that Mulder thinks of this one way and Scully thinks of this another way, and there's a conflict between them just by their stories of the event they already went through. And there is something really fun about playing with that.
Well, last week I recommended The Hidden Face, if you can handle a really inappropriate film. And that film is half one thing and then flashback, but now telling it from a different perspective. But that's slightly different than maybe what you're talking about, Scott, because there's also flashbacks like in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, another incredibly inappropriate movie, where, you know, you've got a character who's thinking back on an event, and so you cut back to that event, like this one shot, right? So like that's a flashback in a sense, but it's a flashback in the context of a movie and something you've already seen, but now you're flashing back to it. Or if you're doing something like, what's the movie, the Gene Hackman with their, he's listening all the time.
The Conversations?
Yeah, the conversations, right? Where you actually like
Conversation?
Yeah, where you actually like play a different recording, like when he finally gets it, right? Like it's a totally different take to be like, oh, I've been thinking it's this way, but now it's a different way. But then there's also the flashbacks where like you're just going back to another time where it's not related to this film in itself. You're just going back. Oh, sorry, just lost my mind. One of my favorite flashbacks without actually showing you, but doing it, happened in Kissing Jessica Stein, where there's a moment where the mother and daughter are talking to each other, and the mother like brings up this past event, and she just kind of tells you what it is, and that's acting like a flashback, but it's reinforcing this moment, and it's one of my favorite like tools of using time to say this thing is this thing again, right? Like we're looping it. We're using this past event to tell us more about this current event and to help us understand that. And I love that. And I still can't do it. I haven't been able to figure out how to write well enough to make that work. So that's another thing. I'm trying to think of now we're going to like go watch this scene that like didn't happen in this movie, but like was important for this moment. And I'm drawing a complete blank. Scott, help me out with ones that you hate.
I mean, yeah. I like I said, I really don't hate flashbacks. I just hate the fact they started using them in Star Wars. And Luke, even as you were talking about, telling the story, I was reminded that in Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, we do get C-3PO telling a story to our little fuzzy bears about what's all led up to this point in time. And in a sense, it's the same kind of storytelling that you get, or you're talking about in the other film, but it's still not flashback necessarily because you're still in the present moment. Right. So I'm trying to figure out, even though you can go back and talk about these other things, like the fact that you don't go back and show it actually, I don't know, it still intrigues me more than, hey, let's go back and show you this flashback.
Okay, and that's an interesting question for me, right? Because film is show, don't tell. But right now, we're talking about something that it might be better to tell than to show, right? And like, speaking of anime, like this is a big thing where the character like literally just says something, right, about their past. Like I think of like Momiji, like that scene in Fruits Basket is unreal, where like he's telling this story and you're like, why am I listening to this? Like, why are you doing this? And then like it just like hammer drops on you. And that is so powerful, and you're not showing it. So is there something about telling a flashback or a past event versus showing a past event in a current setting?
Don't know why y'all are freaking out, but I would like to make another flashback, which I think is one of the more effective ones in recent years, which is Looper. Looper has a sequence that's like a journey through time, like 30-something years of a dude's life. Mm-hmm. And it's actually, what you need to know is it's actually within the context of a flashback, if I remember how the movie's structured correctly. There is, the whole thing is that it sets up this conflict between young him and old him and all this stuff. And then there's this moment where you go and say, oh, and here's how old him got to be old him and is now here doing this. That's a flashback. And so you see young him kill old him and then, go through 30 years of his life and what happens to him. That it would bring him to the point where he will come back And then you see that same moment you've been watching multiple times from old him's perspective and see how that turns out. And it's all perception games, along with, in the course of like 5 minutes, going through 30 years and making you really care about things. It's all flashback, and it's very important, very needed information. But again, it's done in such a way where the flashback is important because it is about a perspective shift. You are on the perspective of one character, the younger version of this guy in this reality. Now you're going to get your perspective shifted by this flashback to see what the older version of him believes and thinks about the world and his perspective on everything. Now you have dueling perspectives on what should happen here. You understand both these characters, even though they're the same character, better, and you have to go forward from that. It is a tool to get you up to speed in such a way that you care about things that you couldn't do any other way. You don't have there's something about that in structure and in editing and in perception that really lets those reveals of information and being done that way very powerful.
Right. And flashbacks aren't the only way to like show time dilation and things like that. And I don't just mean like, oh, it's faster here and slower there. I mean like being in a different moment again. I think of Rian Johnson's latest film, the
Knives Out,
right? Like that one's a great example of like looping back through the story again and again and kind of giving you a different perspective each time you jump through that. As a low budget filmmaker from school, like when you're in a film school, like the way that you always do behind, like going back in time is like you make it black and white and you give a slight reverb to the voiceover so that it shows that like, here it is, right? Because that's the cheap way of doing it. And we've done it in the past. Like it's actually really difficult to take an audience and say, hey, we're actually going back to here. But the same thing happens when you have to rip somebody forward in time. I think of the movie Frequencies, not Frequency, where like you've got this girl who's existing in her little world and she's got a mole on her face because we're going to need to zoom in on her face and then cross dissolve or cut to the older girl who has the same mole to say, hey, it's the same person, but now it's years later, right? And one of the cheapest ways of doing it, and it actually kind of makes me sad when people do it, because again, it's tell, not show, is when you do a title card that says, like 15 years later or whatever, right? Because you're just telling me that this happened. You didn't find a way to show me that it happened. K-Pax is like, has this great transition. It's one of my favorites in film where to show time passing, they show a map with pins in it and then the sun moves. And so the shadows shift, right? And I'm like, this is great. It's telling me this is like a day has passed. It's wonderful. But then you can also do things like A Beautiful Mind, where like you do one single dolly out shot. And as that's happening, you like digitally make it summer, fall, winter, right? And like you say, time has passed that way. So like there's a whole bunch of different ways to like move the audience backward and forward in time. And all these different tricks are used at different times to tell your story. Sorry, Jonathan, you were going to say something.
No, I was just going to say that you talk about the title card being somewhat sad and cheap. I actually like it's actually a useful tool as well, because Avengers Endgame, I remember being in the theater and the movie starts, and in the first 10 to 15 minutes, spoilers if you haven't seen Endgame, get on with it. The main villain of the story gets his head chopped off in the first like 10 minutes of the movie, right? And it kind of everyone's like, didn't solve anything. It just killed that guy. It's resolved. All the heroes walk away, and it cuts to black. It fades to black, and then it says 5 years later. And they take their time in how they do that title card, because that is actually a beat to make the audience feel something, because the audience is confused. Now, I was really happy at that moment in the theater. It's like, oh, they killed him. Excellent. The story is actually going to be interesting. It's not going to be totally dumb. But that I remember being in the theater and that title card coming up and saying 5 years. And people were like, what? Later. Like, what? People were freaking out in the theater about that. So title cards also, if done correctly, even just telling people time has passed, can be a story beat, an emotional beat. And we haven't even talked about, you mentioned it, but time lapses, hyperlapses, montage, slow motion. Even slow motion is time perception. Slow motion is enhancing the moment. Right, the moment now lives forever. We are inside this short few second span, and we're in it. We're watching everything with every little detail. We can even stop time. Right, we can stop time and move around.
Okay, and this is what's cool, right? So like way back at the beginning of this episode, I talked about how like we took cameras and we set them up along a track so we could take 25 pictures as it went along to like capture this moment of when the horse's feet come up. And then Matrix is like, what if we did the same thing to create bullet time? And we just set up like 250 cameras in a circle and then had them all snap photos over and over and over again all at the same time, and then we could choose which frame to move to at which time. Like, awesome.
I wrote that essay in film school. Yeah,
it's so
basically cool. the more cool slow motion techniques, digital techniques of the modern film age is harkening back to the horse bet stuff.
Yep. So cool. Time.
And the speed ramping thing too, which is Luke's favorite, the 300 stuff where you're in slow motion and then you punch in and you speed ramp, and so you're slow and then you're fast and you're slow and you're fast, and it emphasizes the kinetic energy, the power, the strength, the moment of glory, if you will. Like, there is something about that's very interesting. One thing I think that we don't do very well, we haven't figured out how to do very well, is, and this is somewhat of a physics issue rather than just a time perception issue, but how do you make somebody who's fast feel right in a story in film? We can slow things down. We can show things being really cool. We can even say, let's slow down and let the flash go like in normal motion while everyone else is slow motion. That's a classic way of going. But somebody who's just fast, like really fast, how do you, and I'm not even necessarily talking about flash levels, but how do you filmically portray someone moving fast and make it feel right with physics and with time perception and still understand what's going on without doing the Quicksilver Flash, go in slow motion and watch them run around?
Video essay below if I can find the link. Okay, I want to take a step back in time for a moment and also talk about opening titles.
Unless you edit it differently.
Yeah, which I'm not going to do because it takes too much time and I have a little. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, if you do your title cards correctly, like that can be incredibly impactful. It's also interesting that sometimes putting like opening crawl or an opening story thing, like I think of Troy, where it's like, hey, we could add to this 3-hour movie by like trying to show you all these clips to tell you what's going on, but like we're just going to give you some text to read to like catch you up on like 1,000 pages of a book. Like, let's just catch you up with like 4 paragraphs, right? Or you have things like Wonder Woman, where it's like, we're just going to read you a little story at the beginning to like get you up to speed with the world. And yeah, you'll have like little images, but like truly that's not the important thing. It's just to give you the bedrock of where we're coming from. And that happens a lot in film, where like we are just kind of giving you the backstory really fast at the beginning, where we just like voiceover or someone reads a story or like the book opens, like tons of ways of doing that. Just trying to get you up to speed enough that we can start this movie without having to like lay all the groundwork. But then there's other films that are really masterful, or anime series that say, yeah, that backstory stuff, we'll get there. Right now, we're just going to drop you in and you can be like, what is this craziness, right? So like, different ways of going about that.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting concept of how we have to put you in a place in time to even begin telling a story through time. I can, as you were saying that, Luke, I thought of a bunch of movies like Shrek that, starts with you opening a book and reading a story up to a certain point. And, you get that all over the place. So, as an interesting concept of time. What are some of the other things you guys have used in maybe movies that you've made to like actually show the passage of time? Like, have you done a montage? Did it work? Why did it work? Why did it not work? What are some of the tools or tricks that you guys have used?
Luke's definitely done some montages. I've seen some of these montages. I've been a part of some of these montages.
I made a 7-minute movie where like it's nothing but montage.
The movie should have been titled "Nothing But Montage." So Luke, you talked
I have
about
a
that.
confession. I actually used title cards to show passage of time because I had written a script and like it was supposed to show you the time progression. And when Jonathan and I were watching one of the early cuts, he's like, I'm not feeling it. Like, I know that there's like a change. Like, I know it's not the same day, but I'm not catching like just how long this has been. And so we dropped in title cards to be like day 1, day 7, day 13, day 23, right? Like trying to help people capture that 5 years later feel. And it worked. It worked a lot better because of it, which, okay, is my writing and my filmmaking just not good enough to be able to do that? Or is it just, it was easier and it was better to just be like, look, remember, time is passing.
I mean, I tried to mess around with time in one of my film school short films that I made, wrote, and directed, it's called Bygones. And the whole one of the major concepts of the story is that there's a character that can touch objects and see whatever that object's been around in its history. So he can do flashbacks at any time. I made it for Scott. I thought Scott would love this film when I was in film school, having not met him, and so I made it for him.
See, that's good time travel right there, Jonathan.
I'm good at that. So, the way I wanted to do it, and the way I tried to do it the most was I tried to hint at it with a character touching something with his bare. Like I made it very distinct that his hands were covered in gloves, and when he took his gloves off, it was a moment, and when he touched something. He would look a little, he'd have to perform in such a way that something was happening, but you couldn't quite tell what it was. And I progressed from there to be points where I used sound, where, he touched something and you'd hear things that no one else, like, wasn't happening in front of you. So you'd have to imagine it was a past. And eventually I started just doing actual flashbacks where you had an object like glasses, and I did a POV shot for everything that was in the flashback because it was from the glasses point of view. I tried different methods to make it very clear what this power was, what the time passage was, and that you were in a different place. And then, of course, you're using dialogue, and you're trying to hint at things with set dressing and all that kind of stuff. So you can, if you do it well, if you do all the parts of filmmaking well, it can be very cool. But you have to pull them all off, which can be really hard.
So my confession on that is my senior thesis film project was this really short film, and I was trying to show like making choices you can like stop certain things from happening in the future. And so like I play out what happens in the future, and then when you make the choice, it like rewind flashes through all the events that you just saw. And so I tried that. Unfortunately, my prose is better than my script writing, and so everybody loved my script. And when I finally shot and edited the film, I watched my edit, and I was like, I wrote this thing and I have no idea what I just watched. So that was a problem.
I mean, and we can speak in vagaries about a project we are working on right now where it's for kids, and we had an opportunity to solve one of our problems in filmmaking by writing in time travel. And the way that I think we made it very distinctly clear that there was time travel was in part by just having the same person in the same shot at the same time, one frozen and the other one talking. And that person talking also happened to say, time travel is confusing. But you use whatever you can.
And I just want to say, like, we went back and added the time travel part to the original, and that was a pain and a half, but it rocks because we did it.
And it started with writing. It started with knowing what your footage was and writing and saying, how do you write this in such a way you'd be very clear with signifiers and costume and what that person says and when they show up and when they leave. And what tricks do you have? Like, can you split the frame of something you've already shot and put that person in that frame, even though you're shooting it even though it's the same person and you're shooting it later, can you put that person in the same frame at this other time and make it feel like they just walked in the room of this time in the past for that, it's all these tricks that you're using all at the same time to make it feel like someone just showed up back in time.
Super legitimate.
Well, gentlemen, I think we're at that point in the show where we get to make a recommendation. So what
Are you
is
saying
your...
we're out of time?
We might be out of time.
Yeah, we're out
It's
of time.
time to make your recommendation of a movie that you enjoy that plays with time.
I mean, I love Arrival. I do. I love Arrival. Arrival's a fantastic film. And it plays with time in a very awesome way, which is one of my favorite ways. And I won't... if you're intrigued to watch Arrival, stop now and go watch Arrival. But it plays with time. Spoilers. It plays with time in such a way that you don't know that you're seeing a different time being mashed up with the current time. You don't know where you are in time, but you think you do. And by the end of the story, you find out just where you've been and why it makes sense that these two different timelines would be playing in the same way. It would be confusing to you because it puts you in the headspace of the main character who is learning to perceive time in a wholly new way. It is a fantastic short story that was made into a fantastic film. And it's a great, wonderful time perception game.
I need more time. I'm trying to think of a movie. Like, I love low budget time travel movies, and I can't. If you haven't watched Primer, but I feel like I've already mentioned that one. I'm okay, and then I'm like, okay, I've only been mentioning horribly inappropriate movies, so we'll stick with this. There is a short, horribly inappropriate, called Cashback, and like it's low budget, and like they do the freeze frame thing so brilliantly. There's also like insane amounts of nudity, so like it's not appropriate. But like for me as a low budget filmmaker, I'm like, that is amazing that you were able to pull that off. Like, I'm shocked. And then they tried to make it into a full length feature, and it's awful. So don't even not even. It's awful. It's truly awful. So okay, I'll go with that. More inappropriate stuff. I'm sorry for all of my like young people film, even old people. Like, I'm sorry.
Luke's sorry. And another news, Scott, what's your time story?
Well, Jonathan, you put me on the spot because my recommendation was going to be Arrival.
Oh, I'm sorry, Scott. You brought it up and everything.
Yeah.
I stole it from you. I stole it from you.
Yes, well, if you're looking for fun and cheesy, there's always Back to the Future, which is coming to theaters soon as a re-release for AMC. Thank you very much, guys.
Deja Vu is awesome.
Deja Vu is a delightful film, Luke. You should recommend that one.
I'll recommend that one instead of all of these inappropriate movies that I've been mentioning. Although there is a little bit, it's R, isn't it? PG-13.
It's PG-13. It's actually got a little bit of nudity in it.
Yeah, it's got a butt. It's got a butt.
No, it's got a little more than that.
Whoa. Okay. Well, yeah.
For PG-13, you're surprised. It's surprising what it gets away with.
Wow.
And I, considering we've already done a Nolan series and recommendations, it's kind of tough not to recommend anything he's done and how he plays with time. So, yeah, there you go. There's some ideas, but yeah, go watch films. If you're looking for time travel, I guess it was 12 Monkeys, guys. One of the
12 Monkeys is bizarre, yeah.
It's bizarre. But if
it's
you're
very
actually
smart.
looking for a movie that does time travel probably as accurate as we can possibly imagine, that's the movie you're going to want to see.
And that's part of why the bizarreness makes it make sense. By when you get halfway and on, it starts to make way more sense that it's that bizarre. You're like, oh, it's because.
Yeah. So there you go. My recommendation, kind of, sorta. If you're really,
Scott, if it's fine. If you want to take Arrival,
no,
I take 12 Monkeys as my recommendation. We can go back in time through the power of editing and not even have said the opposites. I mean, it all depends on how we want to play this.
How about we just ask our viewers to tune in next time?
Please tune
Hey,
in
viewers.
next time.
Tune in next time, please. We'd like that.
Maybe don't even tune in. Maybe just press the YouTube video because there is no tuning involved. We're beyond that. We don't even make you do that. You just press the YouTube.
But I went back
thumbnail.
in
Wow,
time
time
and made
travel.
a reference.
What? Indoor plumbing. It's going to be huge.
Sliced bread is phenomenal. When I slice it for you, you can do sandwiches. It's a whole other level, guys.
Wait, did they put fluoride in the water yet? I don't remember.
I don't know. The wheel's still a thing, right? We're not like pre-wheel time, are we? Pre-wheel time sucked, by the way. Scott, didn't pre-wheel time suck?
I don't know what
There,
you're
right?
talking about, Jonathan. But we'll catch you next time.